In this episode of Railway, we visit former East Germany. Our tour takes us from Dresden to the capital Berlin, and then via the commercial city of Rostock to the Isle of Rügen. But our journey starts in Dresden, built on the banks of the River Elbe. In the Second World War, a large part of the city was destroyed by Allied bombardments. Still, one can find proof enough of the city's rich history. The 18th century monarch, King Augustus, had a significant influence on the city's fine architecture. According to legend, King Augustus's heart is buried in a tomb in the royal church. The famous theater square has been also rebuilt in the old style and once again exudes a distinctive aura of earlier days. The well-known Semper Opera building has also been fully rebuilt. Since 1985, the building is used again for theater, performances, and concerts. On the other side of the square stands the most famous building of Dresden, the Zwinger, which was once the summer palace of King Augustus. It was built in the Baroque style, but several versions were tried before it finally suited His Majesty's zest for living. The Blue Wonder is the nickname for one of the first steel suspension bridges in the world. A small cable car, more than a century old, brings you almost 100 meters above the city. Most of the buildings that were destroyed by the bombardments in 1945 have been rebuilt or renovated. But for the people of Dresden, the restoration of the city will only be complete with the rebuilding of the Frauenkirche. In the years after the war, the foundations of this totally destroyed church were first used as a memorial for all the civilians who died during the bombardment of February the 13th, 1945. It was the dream of many people of Dresden that the church would be rebuilt. Over the years, money was raised, and finally in 1994, the reconstruction of the church began. Guided by the original detailed building plans, the church is now being rebuilt stone by stone. Builders mapped and stored all original fragments that were recovered. The missing parts are carefully made anew from old drawings. The construction of the Frauenkirche will be completed with the placing of the original church clock. The church will be reopened with a big celebration in the year 2006, when the city celebrates its 800th anniversary. We take leave of Dresden on the spot where in 1839 the first long-distance railway was built in Germany. Because of this railway, various industries, for example, the Waldlossen brewery, came here. Nowadays, Dresden is the hub of an extensive railway network in East Germany. The main station dates from 1852. 40 years later, the striking construction of 3 ship-like concourses was built. Germany is well known for its examples of industrial age building, and this train station is considered to be one of the most impressive ones. From this main train station, 480 national and international trains arrive and depart daily. On an average day, 50,000 people are transported. We also get in one of the most comfortable fast trains of the Deutsche Bahn. The next destination on our route is Berlin, the new capital of the unified Germany. As we cross the railway bridge over the Elbe, we enjoy a final glimpse of the center of Dresden. The trip between Dresden and Berlin consists mainly of farmland. But despite the fact that not many people live in the province of Sachsen, there's an extensive railway network. 2,300 kilometers of railway with almost 500 stopping points. The reunification of East and West Germany also had its effect on the German railway company. To stay ahead of the 9 competitive neighboring countries, people had already talked about a renovation of the railways. But just as the plan for the extensive renovation was ready, a huge problem cropped up Suddenly, because of the German reunification, there were two railway companies, and it would not be easy to connect them. One was just about ready with a renovation plan for being run as a profit-making enterprise, while the other was accustomed to being a monopoly managed by the government. A difficult fit. In the end, the European community called for a new organization that must help German railway into the 21st century. For the next 3 years, there will be a large investment in the expansion and modernization of the infrastructure. Within 2 hours, we approach the suburbs of Berlin. The German capital is a huge city. Its total area covers almost 900 square kilometers. Berlin is 9 times the size of Paris. And because Berlin is this big, it will surely take us another 30 minutes to reach the center of Berlin. The railway network is lurching its way through the inner town. Berlin has as many as 6 major train stations. The view of the city makes it clear that there are extensive building projects going on here as well. The designation of Berlin as the capital city of the newly reunited Germany has also given an enormous impulse to construction. Most of the building projects will be finished in 2003. Then they will have invested over 200 billion marks in the new metropolis on the river de Spree. After our first acquaintance with the city, we get out at the train station called Berlin's Zoo. This station is surprisingly situated in the very center of town, near Berlin's famous boulevard, the Kurfürstendamm. The desire to break with the well-known past of Berlin as a divided city is great. In record time, an almost complete new inner city has been built. But a number of reminders of recent history remain. Here and there, sections of the notorious Berlin Wall are still standing. Most of the original 43-kilometer-long wall that went straight through the inner city fell prey to demolition machines and souvenir hunters. But in some places, a section of the wall is still standing. For example, the East Side Gallery at the Mühlenstraße. This section of 1,300 meters is painted on the east side by 111 known and unknown artists. Since 1992, it's a protected historical monument. Berliners also cherish other monuments and famous buildings, like the Altkirche, which is more than 150 years old. The Brandenburg Gate is probably the most famous landmark of Berlin. Another well-known symbol of Berlin is the Gedächtniskirche, the Remembrance Church. This church was once heavily damaged in the Second World War, but was rebuilt around the ruins of the old church. The Potsdamer Platz was, until the fall of the wall, a bare, empty space. Since 1993, it is one of the world's largest building sites. In a few years, it will be unrecognizable. Berlin's status as a world-class city was also enhanced by the transfer of the German government from Bonn to Berlin. Already in the 50s, they'd started the restoration of the Reichstag building. This historic government building was destroyed by a large fire at the beginning of the Second World War. Under the management of architect Norman Foster, they're now finishing the seat of the German government, which in the meantime has settled itself in the new Reichstag building. Since 1982, Berlin houses the German Museum for Transport and Technology. There were always many technical museums in Berlin, but most of them were destroyed in the war. In the Contemporary Museum of Technology, they try to show as many aspects as possible of the means of transportation, in a collection consisting of bicycles, motorcycles, airplanes, and trains throughout the century. The museum has a gigantic collection of locomotives. This part of the museum is built on the grounds of the old Anhalter merchandise station. The whole collection is placed on 34 different rails in the original locomotive depot, complete with turntables. Arranged by year, one can find almost every important model in the 19th and 20th century. One can admire 40 of the old locomotives in their original state. Other models built to scale are placed in showcases between the real locomotives. They're lined up in chronological order in 33 simulated train station situations throughout the years. For the visitors, this is a pleasant way of wandering through the railway history of Germany. Now we return to one of the contemporary train stations of Berlin to find the train that will take us to our next destination. Rostock is also a holiday resort, and therefore the connection between Berlin and Rostock is excellent. In total, Germany has 12,000 kilometers of railway, which is mainly used by the fast trains. Besides that, German Rail strives after making all connections between all large and medium-sized cities as optimal as possible, especially when it concerns popular holiday destinations. With a final glimpse of the east side of Berlin, we leave the city and move on in the direction of the eastern seaside, to the city of Rostock. In Germany, there's also a great deal of discussion about the train as an environmentally friendly alternative to the automobile. That's why last year the German railway company came up with a statement in which they explained how they could handle the environmental problems better in the years to come. For example, they wanted to reduce the use of energy in the stations and on the trains, separate garbage, and better maintain the vegetation along the rails. Additionally, they've also started building closed toilet systems for the trains. This, together with an improved timetable, part of earlier renovation plans, should encourage motorists to exchange the use of their automobiles for that of the train. Three hours after we leave Berlin, we arrive at the station of Rostock, a medium-sized city with 25,000 inhabitants in the north of Germany on the Baltic Sea. The city is almost 800 years old. Rostock is a true commercial city, situated on a bay of the Baltic Sea. The commercial trading past is still very evident as we look at the old merchant houses that are so characteristic of the city. The extraordinary facades draw our special attention. With the construction of a facade, the mercantile families tried to outdo each other. That is the reason for the different styles of construction next to each other. One of the finest buildings of the city is the 500-year-old university building, built in the Italian Renaissance style. In Rostock, the harbor is not only for trade. More and more tourists use the harbor as a base for a variety of outings. For example, to one of the traditional seaside places. In summer, Kühlungsborn is a busy seaside resort with a good example of traditional German resort architecture. In the off-season, however, it's almost deserted. One of the biggest attractions here is the little steam train Molly. The train connects the three best-known places on the outskirts of Rostock. Since 1886, this train has been transporting seaside visitors between Kühlungsborn, Heiligendamm, and Bad Doberan. It is the oldest narrow-gauge railway on the eastern shore, and the only steam rail section in Germany with a strange width of 900 millimeters. A few years ago, the German railway company transferred this section to a private organization on the condition that they would maintain a fixed and regular timetable. Therefore, it's possible to travel by this train several times a day on all days. For those who might have to wait a little while, there's a small museum that tells you more about the history of this 15.5-kilometer long narrow-gauge railway. After the locomotive is turned in the right direction, we get in to take a ride with Molly. Our destination, Bad Doberan. At very slow speed, we pass the station at Heiligendamm. On request, the train stops at the small station for people who would like to pay a visit to this old resort, which has seen better days. At full speed, Molly roars through the landscape. For every railway crossing, she gives a warning that she's approaching. From the train as well as from the road, it's a magnificent view as Molly runs alongside the Lindenallee between Heiligendamm and Bad Doberan. Whether you take this ride by steam train to get to a destination or as a sightseeing excursion, the 40 minutes it takes are a terrific way to see the area from a different point of view. The arrival in Bad Doberan is spectacular. The train runs right across the very narrow, intermittent streets of the center. Molly is forced to run very slowly here, and therefore there's still enough time for a drink in the bar car before Molly arrives at the station of Bad Doberan. This is how, over a century ago, the members of the court of Mecklenburg arrived after an outing to the east seaside. But the origin of Bad Doberan dates back many more years. In 1711, a monastery was founded there. Its church is still there, now known as the Doberaner Münster. The resorts on the Baltic or eastern seaside are very popular as a holiday destination. But the most popular destination of this part of Germany is undoubtedly the Isle of Rügen. There is a fine railway from Rostock to Sassnitz, which is the capital of the island. Thanks to the long railway bridge, the crossing takes almost no time at all. To take a peek at Cap Arcona at the northernmost tip of the island, visitors must leave their automobiles behind, but various alternatives are offered in getting there. For example, a horse-drawn tram or mini-train. The tourist attractions of Cap Arcona, however, are the lighthouses. The smallest lighthouse was built in 1823. In 1902, the biggest one took over the task of guiding ships safely around the Northern Cape. A walk around the lighthouses is certainly worthwhile. Each of the houses also holds a museum of technology in the small house, and in the big one there's a permanent exhibit about the life in the Northern Cape. If you're feeling in good condition, it's also very worthwhile to climb to the top of the houses. Despite the excellent railway connections on the island from the German railway company, a part of the railway connection on the island is still provided by a steam train, Der Rasende Roland, the Roaring Roland. This train runs over a section of 24 kilometers from Görin at the southeast coast to Putbus at the center of the island. This section is the last remaining piece of the original 97-kilometer railway connection between the most important seaside resorts on the island. In addition to regular transport of passengers, it's also an excellent way to survey the lower half of the island. The biggest attraction of the island, however, is naturally the seashore. Various nice outings can be made from the harbor of Sassnitz, the capital of the island of Rügen. On a daily basis, several shipping companies sail out to view a number of interesting sights from the water. For example, the lighthouses on Cape Arcona, or one can go to the island's characteristic chalk cliffs. The chalk cliffs are part of a nature reserve called Jasmund, a large protected forest area of over 2,500 hectares. By means of a path through the forest, sometimes difficult to traverse, it is possible to reach the King's Chair, at 120 meters, the highest point on the chalk rock foundation. With this view of one of the most beautiful places on the island of Rügen, we end this episode of Rail Away.